Maloney was waiting for her husband to come home from work. She began to listen. A few minutes later, punctually as always, she heard the car door slamming, the footsteps passing the window, the key turning the lock. She laid aside her sewing, stood up, and went forward to kiss him as he came in. "Hi, honey," she said. "Hello," he answered. She took his coat and hung it in the closet. She walked over and made the drinks, a strongish one for him and one for herself that was weaker. She sat down again to do her sewing. "Tired, darling?" "Yes," he said, "I'm tired." As he spoke, he did an unusual thing. He lifted his glass and drained it in one swallow. He paused a moment, leaning forward in the chair. Then he got up and went slowly over to fetch himself another. "I'll get it," she cried, jumping up. "Sit down," he said. "Well, I think it's a shame," she said, "that when a policeman gets as senior as you, they keep him walking on his feet all day long." He didn't answer, so she bent her head again and went on with her sewing. "Honey," she said, "would you like me to get you some cheese? I haven't made dinner because it's Thursday." "No," he said. "If you're too tired to eat out," she went on, "it's still not too late. Now, there's plenty of meat and stuff in the freezer." Her eyes waited for an answer, a smile, a little nod. He made no sign. "Anyway," she went on, "I'll get you some cheese and crackers first." "I don't want it," he said. She moved uneasily in her chair, the large eyes still watching his face. "But you must eat." "I'll fix it anyway, and you can have it or not as you like." She stood up, placed her sewing on the table by the lamp. "Sit down," he said. "Just for a minute, sit down." It wasn't until then that she began to get frightened. "Go on," he said. "Sit down." She lowered herself slowly in the chair, watching him all the time with those large, bewildered eyes. He had already finished his second drink and was staring down in the glass. "Listen," he said, "I've got something to tell you." "What is it? What's the matter?" She noticed there was a little muscle moving near the corner of his left eye. "This is going to be a bit of a shock to you, I'm afraid, but I thought about it a great deal, and I decided it's the only thing to do is to tell you right away. I hope you won't blame me too much." And he told her. It didn't take long, 4 or 5 minutes at the most, and she sat very still through it all, watching him with a kind of dazed horror as he went further and further away from him with each word. "So there it is," he added. "There simply isn't any other way. Of course I'll give you money and I'll see that you're looked after, but I hope you're not going to make a fuss about this. It wouldn't be very good for my job." Her first instinct was not to believe any of it at all, to reject it. Maybe as she went about her business, she might find that none of it ever happened. I'll get dinner," she managed to whisper, and this time he didn't stop her. When she walked across the room, she couldn't feel her feet touching the floor. She couldn't feel anything except a slight nausea and a desire to vomit. Everything was automatic now. She went down the cellar steps, turned the light switch on, into the deep freeze, her hand inside taking hold of the first object it found. She lifted it out and looked at it. A leg of lamb. All right, then, they would have lamb for supper. She carried it upstairs and went through the living room. She saw him standing over by the window with his back towards her, and she stopped. "For gosh sakes," he said, hearing her but not turning around, "don't make dinner for me. I'm going out." At that point, Mary Maloney walked up behind him without any pause, and she swung that big frozen leg of lamb right in the air and brought it right down as hard as she could on the back of his head. She might have well have hit him with a steel club. She stepped back a pace, waiting, and the funny thing was that he remained standing there for at least 4 or 5 seconds, gently swaying. Then he crashed into the carpet. The violence of the crash, the noise, the small table overturning it helped bring her back out of her shock. She came out slowly, feeling cold and surprised that she was still holding that ridiculous piece of meat tight between both hands. "All right," she told herself. "So I've killed him. It was extraordinary now how clear her mind became all of a sudden. She began thinking very fast. She carried the meat into the kitchen, placed it in the pan, turned on the stove on high, and shoved it inside. Then she washed her hands, she put on her coat, went out the back door, and into the streets towards the grocery store. When she got back home, she put the groceries down into the living room, and then she saw him lying there on the floor. It was rather a shock. All the love and longing she had for him welled up inside, and she ran over to him and knelt beside him and began to cry her heart out. It was easy. No acting was necessary. A few minutes later, she got up and went to the phone and called the police station. Quick, Patrick's dead! Who's speaking? Mrs. Maloney. Mrs. Patrick Maloney. He's laying on the floor and I think he's dead. We'll be right over. The car came very quickly, and when she opened the front door, 2 policemen walked in. She knew them both because she knew nearly everyone at the police station. Sergeant Grant kneeled by the body. Is he dead? She cried. I'm afraid so. What happened? Briefly, she told her story about going to the grocery store and coming back to find him on the floor. Soon, others began to come to the house. Doctors, detectives, later a police photographer, and a man who knew all about fingerprints. There was a great deal of whispering and muttering besides the corpse, and the detectives kept asking her a lot of questions, but they always treated her kindly. She told her story again and again. Detective Grant gently told her her husband had been killed by a blow on the back of the head administered by a heavy blunt instrument, almost certainly a large piece of metal. They were looking for the weapon. The murderer may have taken it with him, but on the other hand, he may have thrown it away or hidden it somewhere on the premises. It's the old story, he said. Get the weapon and you've got your man. The search went on. There were policemen in and outside the house. It began to get late, nearly 9. The men searching the room seemed to be growing weary. When the sergeant returned a second time, she looked at him with her large, dark, tearful eyes and said, would you do me a small favor, you and the others? We can try, Mrs. Maloney. Well, she said, you all must be terribly hungry because by now it's 9 o'clock. And I know Patrick would never forgive me, God bless his soul, if I allowed you to remain in this house without offering a decent hospitality. Why don't you eat up that lamb that's in the oven? It'll be cooked just right by now. I don't know, Sergeant Grant said. Oh, please eat it, she begged. I couldn't eat a thing under the circumstances. It'd be a favor to me if you ate it up. Then you can go about your work afterwards. There was a great deal of hesitating among the policemen, but they were clearly hungry, and in the end they went into the kitchen and helped themselves. Mary stayed where she was, listening to them speaking, their voices thick and sloppy with mouths full of meat. Have some more, Charlie. No, better not finish it. She wants us to finish it. She said so. Be doing her a favor. Okay then, give me some more. The killer must have used a huge club to hit poor Patrick, one of them was saying. The doc said his skull was smashed all to pieces, just like from a sledgehammer. That's why it ought to be easy to find. Exactly what I say. Whoever did it, they're not going to be carrying a thing like that around them any longer than they need. Personally, I think it's right here on the premises. Probably right under our very noses. What do you think, Jack? And in the other room, Mary Maloney began to giggle. Mr. Toastman.